Welcome back to Think Inclusively, the podcast that discusses real issues for people with disabilities. This week we'll be tackling the topic of universal design. Universal design, or the creation of barrier-free environments, is a very simple idea. All buildings, products and services should be designed in a way that the number of potential users is optimised. The need for specialised design or adaptation must be minimised, and one simple design that can meet people's needs of all ages, sizes and abilities equally, and these designs should be made prevalent in society. We will be discussing what universal design means for people living with disability and how it does or could influence their life. We will be getting some insight from designers about how the universal design concept is incorporated into their work or study. Lastly, we will finish with some perspectives of students who put themselves in the shoes of someone with a disability for a day and hear about their reflections on the experience. We have a jam-packed show this week, so let's get right into it. We will start with my interview with Laura Campbell. Hi, I'm here with Laura Campbell, this year's ANUSA Disability Officer. Can you tell us a little bit about your disability that you live with?
So I have a autoimmune chronic illness called systematic lupus erythematosus, but it's more commonly known as lupus. My array of symptoms would be like having arthritis, having been a chronic asthmatic, and also having chronic fatigue.
What day-to-day activities do you find particularly challenging due to your condition?
I think probably energy levels is a large one for me. Trying to do as much as I can within a day can be quite difficult in regards to dealing with the Disability Collective as well as doing my double degree of psychology and law. But then again, I also have problems of arthritis in regards to typing and writing, as well as any sort of finesse things of doing up buttons of clothing or doing my turning on the taps of water.
Do you own any objects that are designed specifically to assist with mobility?
I use ergonomic chairs and I also use ergonomic tables. That's usually facilitated to me through ANUSA, but I also find that sitting in libraries or public spaces for more than sort of 20 minutes to do work can be quite difficult because I'll have to start taking a bit of codeine to deal with the pain, and that can obviously make you a bit sleepy and not as alert in regards to trying to do your homework in large bouts.
Could these items be replaced by inclusive design or mainstream versions of these objects that can be used by everyone?
I think that things like ergonomic chairs and ergonomic tables are a really important thing for places like universities. There's been quite a lot of research into the sedimentary sort of lifestyle that we lead as a Western culture today, in that a lot of people are sitting down for a lot of their jobs, doing office work or doing sort of academic research. And in regards to that, they've found that chairs and ergonomic chairs and can help a lot with posture, can help a lot with back problems, hip problems, neck problems, all sorts of things within people who don't have disabilities. And I think in a society where our life expectancy is a lot larger and we have to think about, a prospect of living for another 40, 50 years, we have to think about how we are treating our bodies for the future.
I've heard that the Disability Collective have been working on some issues around campus to do with mobility. Can you tell us a bit about what you think are the most pressing issues facing students at ANU to do with accessibility and mobility?
I think our largest problem at the moment is just simple accessibility into buildings. But the thing is that each building needs to be fully accessible from the get-go. We have a lot of problems in the situation that getting inside a building can sometimes be just non-existent. We have ramps that go up and have stairs at the end of them. We have ramps that have illegal gradients. We have major institutional buildings like the Disability Services Centre, which are placed in inaccessible areas on second floors of buildings. We have compulsory tutorial rooms that are completely inaccessible. We have non-working elevators. Things like this, which would seem fairly simple and not a very emotionally connective issue can create huge problems in people with disabilities accessing what is their fundamental right of higher education.
If you could make ANU students more aware of one thing to do with mobility on campus, what would it be?
I think probably what I would make is how hard it is for people with disabilities to get to their classes in the first place. So in regards to a lecture, most people would say it takes them about 3 coffees, a couple of bars of chocolate, and a lot of online shopping to get through a 2-hour lecture. And it's hard, it's huge amounts of information, and it's tiring in itself. So if you take that situation and then put before it this half an hour saga of going around ramps, trying to get up elevators that don't particularly work, going to the admin to see if they can, turn the elevator on and make sure that it works, or trying to get to something like that, and then doing that 2-hour lecture, it becomes this situation where to access your own education that you have fought so hard to have becomes an even bigger problem. And I think that can be very, very demoralising for a lot of people with disabilities, is that you see a lot of able-bodied people who don't have to work 1/10 of how hard you have to work just to get to a lecture and just to do the assignments and just to access these what should be public facilities.
There's some great insight there from Laura, but now we'll move on to Bonnie's interview with Joel. Joel, who is a university student, will tell us a bit about his experience using a specialty speech recognition software called Dragon Naturally Speaking.
Joel, first of all, how would you describe your condition? As a disability or an impairment?
To be honest, I'm not sure. I guess I'd probably describe it as a temporary disability.
Yep.
Yeah.
Could you tell us what this temporary disability is?
Okay, so I've got tendinitis in both hands from a repetitive strain injury from too much typing. It means that I can't do any significant amount of typing. Even 10 minutes is too much. This affects both hands. The most I can do is use a mouse.
So how long have you been living with this temporary disability?
This time, which is the most severe time, I've had it since mid-October last year.
Okay. And last year you were in the middle of your honours year, right?
Yes.
Yep. So in carrying out the day-to-day activities that comprise most people's days, what tasks or activities do you find most challenging due to your particular temporary disability?
Okay, so obviously typing, writing would be typing and writing would be the two most difficult activities, which they're basically, at one point or another just off the list.
Yep.
Sometimes things like certain cleaning activities, like mopping, can be a problem because of the pressure required in hands.
Yep.
I would have problems sometimes opening my office door because it was quite a heavy door.
Yep.
I mean, having a lighter door would have been nice, but I eventually learned to just kick the door open. So I just put in my key and kick the door open. So, you figure ways around these things.
Yep.
As an honours student, I am an honours student in the maths department, which has a fair amount of office space. They fortunately had enough space to give me my own office so that I could finish off my thesis in a room that was quiet enough for me to do dictation.
Oh, okay.
This isn't something that is usually available. Most honours students would be lucky to be in a department.
Yep.
It's like that. And so that was a fortunate thing. If you were an honours student, usually they wouldn't be able to do that for you.
Yep.
And that was good. The other one is, if you're not an honours student, you're not going to be able to have your own space to do work. So universities often provide libraries and study spaces like that. They're not suitable for you normally. What is provided is the disability student room in the Chifley Library. Now, it's got a previous copy of Dragon Naturally Speaking on there, so it's okay, but I I didn't feel that the provision was quite good enough, at least for my needs, because I needed to, as a maths student, I didn't need to just type text.
So is this a type of product that is used in the mainstream? Like, is it widely available?
Dragonaturally speaking, not exactly. You can't just walk into your standard department store and buy it. But on university campuses, you'll always be able to get it at the co-op store.
Yeah.
So it's not too hard to source.
Yeah. But it is a fairly...
The student pricing is $100.
Okay.
Standard pricing is $300. The professional edition $600. And what I ended up doing, which was get the $100 edition, and found some free software online that didn't work that well, and I had to fix to give me the functionality of the professional edition without actually owning the professional edition. Took me about 2 weeks to set up. So
oh, really? Okay,
at least when setting it up by voice rather than via hands.
So really, to do everything you needed it to do, it's not that easy to access?
Not really.
Now I will pass it over to Courtney, who engaged in some interesting discussion about the role of designers involved in the inclusive design movement. She will be talking to Jimmy, who is a recently graduated architecture student.
What elements of inclusive design were you taught, and how was it approached in your architecture degree?
During the undergrad, we sort of get a pretty vague understanding of what's required in terms of ramps, for, I guess, wheelchair access is the only real kind of universal design, I guess, feature that we'd use. Also, I guess, elevators, the specific size of the elevators, I think, would be one thing. But there's nothing really apart from sort of a general sort of guideline in terms of gradient of ramps, and in the undergrad, very little. It's more sort of just having an understanding of what is required and what we need to know, but without actually knowing the details and the specifics of it. But it is there. It is there, definitely.
So you're not, as an undergrad architecture design student, to be designing houses or buildings, habitats for a wide variety of people potentially. You're not given core, understanding of even disabled, other than, ramps and stuff like that. But what about people who only have use of two of their fingers in their hand, or one side of their body because they've had a stroke, or someone who can't push buttons, like a lift button? Or something like that is something to that, they're quite extreme and quite common disabilities. Is that touched on in what you have learnt in your degree?
Not particularly, because those sort of, I guess, design features such as buttons, they would fall under sort of a product design or industrial design sort of education, because they aren't designed by architects a lot of the time. It's more by, the manufacturers of the specific component or part. But in saying that, there are lots of, quality architects that, focus on detail, and they would design their own handrails. Aesthetics often takes more importance than, I guess, universal design, I guess.
Tell me about this architect that you were talking about earlier who has a pretty ramp in his house.
Okay, so I guess the one of the most iconic residential houses of modern architecture, you could say, is the Villa Savoie by Le Corbusier. He incorporated this really beautiful ramp that sort of split the building. It's really quite beautiful, and I guess in a sense, good design can be aesthetically pleasing as well as being inclusive, and it all comes down to design really. And a lot of the time, I guess it's to do with the quality of the design, whether it's easier to not be I guess inclusive, or cheaper, but I guess it's more difficult to be inclusive, and I think that's what design is about as well.
Now we will move on to our next segment. I spent the day with 3 ANU students, Max, Miranda and Nick. I asked them all to go about their normal day at uni but in the shoes of a person with a disability. I was inspired by Laura Campbell and I's discussion about what she wished able-bodied students would realise about living with a disability. Miranda had some of her fingers taped together and her hands strapped, giving her very little dexterity or mobility to grip, push or hold anything. Nick was wearing a pair of glasses where most of his vision was obscured, and Max was using a pair of crutches. None of these students have a physical disability, but were willing to spend the day with these simulated impairments in order to better understand what it may be like for those who do have a disability. Hi Miranda, how are you feeling about our experiment today?
Pretty good so far. I mean, it hasn't been that difficult yet, but I'm anticipating that it will get a bit harder when I have to do smaller things, like getting change out of my wallet, things like that. Yeah, cool.
And what about you, Nick?
I'm not really sure yet. I don't really know what to expect.
And you, Max?
I'm a little bit unsure. It'll be interesting to see how people react and how I deal with everyday activities.
At the end of the day, I caught up with Max, Miranda and Nick to see how they went.
How did you find your experience, Nick?
It was a bit scary. When anything stopped, like I couldn't see, obviously I couldn't see anything, but I didn't really know where anything was, so if like someone wasn't touching me, I was just stood still. I usually check my phone 24/7, and it just felt weird even if it was not too long a time, just not being able to see what the time was. Like, got a couple of messages, couldn't check them. I also went to the toilet, and that was possibly the most scary thing because I walked in, didn't really know where anything was, or obviously didn't know where anything was.
And what about you, Miranda?
Holding things was difficult, and typing was really slow. That was hard. And weirdly, in particular, opening doors, pushing on doors was hard with my hands all bandaged. And yeah, just like small fiddly things. Yeah, and putting on my backpack. Yeah.
And what about you, Max?
Picking routes to places that didn't involve stairs was actually quite difficult, and it made things a lot more inconvenient. Getting up floors in buildings was quite difficult because often the lifts weren't signposted at all. They were like usually on the map if you could find the floor plan map, but there was rarely a signposting towards the lift.
In my discussion with Max, Miranda and Nick, we talked a lot about how they all became highly dependent on others for the day, having to ask people to assist them with holding things, opening doors and leading them around. At first they were sceptical about the concept of universal design and not fully understanding its importance in the community. Yet after their day in the shoes of someone with a disability, they began to understand its necessity, as well as their privilege as able-bodied people. Universal design is a new concept that is slowly working its way into the mindset of designers and consumers. By incorporating the idea of thinking inclusively, we can expand the potential of all people with disabilities, making them less reliant on able-bodied people, ultimately giving people with disabilities an equal opportunity to contribute and participate in society.
This is Joe McLaren, and thanks for joining me for another episode of Thinking Inclusively.